Hey everyone, I'm Dan Sagan from Hydro Ottawa, and I'll be hosting the ThinkEnergy podcast. Are you looking to better understand the fast-changing world of energy? Well, the ThinkEnergy podcast isn't your ordinary energy show. Every 2 weeks, we take you on a tour and discuss, through a communications lens, some of the coolest trends, emerging technologies, and latest innovations. So stay tuned as we explore some traditional and some quirky facets of this industry. This is the ThinkEnergy podcast. Hey everyone, welcome to episode 10 of the ThinkEnergy podcast. This is going to be a cool one. The energy industry is seeing fundamental changes driven by regulators, the government, technology, and the environment. Even market shares are being muddied by new rivals. Looking ahead, a new kind of energy economy is emerging. What are the strategies for energy companies to address potential competition in the changing landscape? So here's my big question for today. What does the future of energy look like in the mind of an energy company CEO for Canada's national capital? In this episode of ThinkEnergy, I'm joined by a very special guest, my boss, Bryce Conrad, President and Chief Executive Officer of Hydro Ottawa Holding. Bryce, thank you for taking the time to join us today. I'm truly grateful. Let's start by you telling our listeners who Bryce Conrad is and what attracted you to the energy sector.
I feel like I should have a bio, and I don't. So let me just say I've been with the company now for almost 8 years, I think. Yeah, 8 years. And before that, I was with the Government of Canada. I left the Government of Canada as the Assistant Deputy Minister, Program Operations at Infrastructure Canada. We just finished running the Economic Action Plan. That sort of where we got to spend lots of money and stimulate the economy in the.
That was with the Conservative government, right?
Yeah, although I was obviously nonpartisan as an ADM, but so yeah, and then as I was winding that down, got the call from a headhunter to see if I'd be interested in coming to Hydro Ottawa. Honestly, and I tell this story, I had no idea what Hydro Ottawa was. I assumed it was the water company. So no one was more surprised than me when they hired me. So, but it's been a great run. I had a lot of fun. It's a good company.
So, but what attracted you to the energy sector?
A couple of things. As part of the recruitment process, they created an executive summary or an executive, it was about a 20-page document outlining what the challenge was. And in that document, I still remember it to this day, there was a line in there saying the greatest risk facing this company was missing an opportunity to grow. And I thought, that's pretty cool. It's not about, more customers, less customers, doing different things, or it was about proactively having the support of the board to grow a company and make it bigger and better than it otherwise was. And for them to put that in that report, obviously that was their intent, and that was front and center, and has been front and center throughout my term here. So we've grown the company dramatically and substantially, and at the behest of the board and with the support of the board, and that's really what's been fun.
Cool. Well, I'd like to drill down on this. If we're taking a 360 view of this industry right now, what are some of the disruptors, game changers that are showing up on your radar?
There's a number, some positive, some negative. So let's start with the positive because I want to be a positive person. Distributed energy resources, the idea that you can, as a homeowner, create your own energy, manage your own energy, use your own energy, and sell back whatever energy you don't want. 20 years ago, that was never conceived of, and here we are today, and we have that in place in some instances as pilot projects, obviously. But that's something that's going to go forward, and that has huge implications for the utility. Some of them are negative, but generally speaking, I think if you give people full control of these things, that they'll behave responsibly and they'll do the right thing. The customer, I tell the story of my grandmother all the time who, she would sit at home and wait for the mail to be delivered. And of course, as soon as the mail was delivered, she'd get her checkbook out and she would pay the bill. It was a big day. That was what she liked to do. Those days and those people are gone. People today now want to interact with the utility. They want to interact with all their service providers. They want to understand how better to use it, how better to manage the costs, how they want line of sight to their activities and what the implications of those activities are. So the customers become incredibly well-informed, incredibly well-intentioned for the most part, and the flip side is very demanding, which is a good thing. The technology, it feels like everyone's got a science project in the energy sector. But if you think of something like batteries, if you short of cold fusion, if you can sort of find a meaningful way to sort of allow for storage of energy, that will be a game changer. And I don't think we're that far away from having that take place. The flip side is you look at some of the other stuff, some of them less positive. You got cyber. I mean, cyber was never an issue for us. For my predecessor, cyber wasn't really that big a deal. Now it's front and center of everything we do. We don't put in place a new technology unless it's been tested and we know that it's secure from a cybersecurity perspective. I remind everybody we're the utility to the nation's capital of a G7 country. So we're not just any other utility in Canada. We have a responsibility beyond the norm, and cyber is a perfect example. The traditional obscurity by security by obscurity is no longer valid. So that's going to be ever present. In fact, I suspect we're going to devote even more resources to it going forward.
What about EV? Do you think EV would have a great impact on infrastructure? Like, do we have that state of readiness?
I think electric vehicles are fascinating. I think the short answer is they're amazing cars to drive. So if you've ever had the pleasure of driving one, you'll know what I speak of. People say they're for the tree huggers and all that nonsense. But if you go to a Formula One race, those are effectively electric cars. They have electric transmissions. There's no lag when they hit the gas. They hit the gas. It's electric. Don't get me wrong. There's also plenty of rocket fuel sitting in the back of those things too. But that electrification is there. From our perspective, from the grid here in Ottawa, we're prepared to accommodate and support it. An infusion of electric cars, for sure. We've done a lot of work and a lot of analysis trying to figure out where they'll be, who will be buying them. Unfortunately, I think it's really it's fallen victim to public policy. You have different levels of government, either for or against it, putting their money into it or taking their money out of it, and they're expensive still. So if you're living on a budget, trying to be frugal, your best bet is still your traditional Honda Civic gas-powered car, because it's still going to be cheaper from a life cycle perspective than an electric car. But I think that's going to change quickly. Okay.
I'd like to move on to another question here. Hydro Ottawa has encountered significant weather-related challenges in the past couple of years. How does this disruptive weather affect the company, Hydro Ottawa, and how do you adapt for this type of changing environment?
Yeah. I know the President of the United States isn't sure whether or not climate change is real or not, because there's good signs on apparently both sides. But let me assure you, when I see tornadoes touching down in downtown Nepean, something's going on. If I just take 2018 as an example, we had a severe ice storm, followed a month later by a severe windstorm, followed 3 months later by 4 months later by 6 tornadoes touching down in our service territory.
And we just had Orleans a couple of months ago.
We just had Orleans, another one. It's just it's become the key threat, I would suggest, going forward. How we handle climate change, the severity of the storms. It used to be, and people confuse climate change with weather, and that's obviously a fallacy that we need to break. But it's not about the weather today. It's about that. It's about the severity of the storms. It's about the frequency of those storms. It's about, why are we having a 1 in 100 year flood 3 years ago at Chaudière Falls, followed 3 years later by a 1 in 1,000 level year? I mean, we need to reset the statistics on these things. We can no longer call them 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000 because they're happening too frequently. The city of Calgary is the same way. City of Toronto on the weekend, you saw the flash flooding there. So from our perspective, from an infrastructure perspective, we need to revisit our standards. We need to say, are we building these things to the right level? And we built a brand new generating station. We built it to withstand a 1 in 1,000 year flood. No sooner did we build it, we got a 1 in 1,000 year flood. Now, we built it well, we built it hard. So it withstood without any major issues. But the same can't be said for our poles and our wires. And the answer is not burying the infrastructure necessarily. I mean, again, if you have a flash flood like that in Toronto, burying that infrastructure just means that those wires are underwater. So we just have to go back and revisit everything. How are we guiding the wires? How are we building our civil stuff? How are we doing where are we building our transformer stations? How are we building them?
So lessons learned are basically guiding the way we're preparing moving forward. We're always reassessing, comparing against those storms to be bulletproof.
Yeah, and I don't think we'll ever be bulletproof. Yeah. I mean, I think the tornadoes were a great example where, notwithstanding the fact that it did devastating amount of damage to our system, it was compared to the ice storm, obviously, from 98. And I would argue, from a damage perspective, the tornadoes were much worse because, you couldn't have hit a worse place from our perspective. So it's about building better, but it's also about responding. And I think what we did well during the tornado was we responded well, both in terms of the crews, restoring the power, and just the way we dealt with and managed the customer equation, I thought was a real strong point for the company.
Good. Well, while we're on the topic of turbulence, if you want, in the midst of all this turbulence, whether it's technological advancements or maybe even declining demand, do you see growth opportunities with the utility?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we ourselves here at Hydro Ottawa have done. We've invested in a number of companies that are aimed at responding to these things. I'd point out something like Cable Q, which is a cable testing company that we've worked with the National Research Council. Effectively to say, it's not simply about replacing the wires, it's about determining whether the wires need to be replaced in the first place. So things like that, where we have an opportunity to sort of take advantage of local technology and pilot it. I look at some of our energy services stuff.
So green energy.
For example. We've grown our green energy fleet by 500% in the past 6 years. We're now the largest municipally owned provider of green energy in Canada. 107,000 homes. It's a point of pride. It's a point of pride for the company. It's a point of pride for our community. And when the world and the governments collectively get their heads wrapped around what climate change means, that's going to be a feather in our cap. That's going to be something that we can continue to build on. I look at some of the stuff that we've done with the city in terms of the streetlights. 58,000 streetlights will be converted over the course of 4 years from sort of standard sodium lights to LEDs. Saving the city, 50% on their energy costs, saving the city on the life cycle costs of those things, but also because it's the right thing to do, and it future-proofs the city in the sense that every one of those lights is IP addressable. Every one of those lights can be customized. Everyone can be dimmed up. You can light them up. You can put in weather detectors. You can put in CCTV cameras if you want to. You can put in gunshot detectors.
So that feeds into that smart city model.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think as a utility, as an industry, I think we missed the connected home. With all due respect, we've got our Alexa and we've got the Google Nest and stuff like that. But we were very much a follower in that area, where I don't think, in fact, where I know utility has to be, and in fact will be enablers in the connected community, because those streetlights, those poles, those conduits, those wires, all of that is going to be a requirement for a truly smart city of the future. Okay. And we'll play our part in that.
Okay. Now we're going to switch it up a bit. We're going to go on the warm and fuzzy side here. So, Bryce, can you name me a person who has had tremendous impact on you as a leader? Maybe someone who's been a mentor. Why and how did this person impact your life?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And look, I've been very, very, very fortunate in my life, both in the public service and here, to have had great mentors and great bosses. But I will say, I learned from everybody. My first job in government, I was, a lowly person, and I had a senior administrative assistant that kind of took me under her wing and sort of taught me how to be a good worker and employee. I learned from her. Right up through to when I left the government, I had the privilege of working for a deputy minister named Yaprak Baltajul, who's actually on our board of directors. And Yaprak was she was my deputy at the time, but she retired as the secretary of the Treasury Board, which is probably the second or third most powerful position in the government. And I learned day in and day out from her how to behave, how to be a leader, how to make decisions. How to be humble. I mean, the one thing I would say with her is she was so humble and so authentic that you couldn't help but like her and listen to her. And I challenge people today to find that one boss that you take a bullet for. And she was the boss that I would have taken a bullet for.
Okay, well, on that, what advice would you give someone going into a leadership position for the first time?
I don't pretend to be the one that's going to offer leadership advice to anybody, but I would say two things. One is leadership exists at all levels within an organization. There are leaders amongst our co-op students. There are leaders amongst our engineers. There are leaders amongst our senior managers. There are leaders amongst our executives. So you don't have to be at the top of a food chain to be a leader, and I think that's important. So, two, I think leadership is about being authentic. To the extent that people believe what you're saying to be true, and that you're not quote unquote bullshitting them or sugarcoating them or doing anything else. Like you are who you are, and you're comfortable in your own skin. I think that's probably the most compelling part of being a leader, right? That's the part that breeds kind of loyalty. It just breeds all the right things. So just be authentic.
Okay, tell me, what is your finish line? As an example, I'll give you an example. Gary Vaynerchuk tells his employees, it might not be your team here.
No, it's not.
That his end goal is to buy the New York Jets. What's your big, bodacious goal?
So anyone that knows me knows that I'm a huge Dallas Cowboys fan. So the fact that you're quoting a New York Jet to me is offensive. But then I just look at the records and say, well, there are plenty of people offended by the New York Jets. So, the right answer is I want to build this company up. The mayor and my board chair, Jim Durrell, who I consider a mentor and a friend, he has this saying that you should leave the campsite better than the way you found it. And so the honest to God answer is I want to leave this company in a better place than the one I found it, and make it bigger, better, more relevant, more community focused, more in line with the community and its objectives and its expectations than it was when I found it. So that's the honest answer. The not so honest answer is I want to own the Dallas Cowboys. But
okay, cool. Okay, I'm assuming you travel quite a bit.
Yes. My wife would say too much.
Okay. What would be...
Or not enough, depending on the day.
Who would be your dream seatmate on your next flight, and why?
It's funny. I have sat next to some incredible people when traveling. I sat next to... it's true story. I sat next to Joe Clark once, and just a fascinating, honest man, just a really great storyteller. I sat next to Belinda Stronach once on an airplane, and all I kept thinking is, as she got up to go to the bathroom, is I wonder if she left any change on the chair. But the honest answer is the guy I would want to sit next to is Jerry Jones. He's the owner of the Dallas Cowboys.
Okay.
Because I would love to have his attention for an uninterrupted period of time so I could give him my advice as to what he's done wrong. So
okay.
So, but he, now Jerry doesn't fly commercials, so the chances of me getting invited on Jerry's plane are slim to none.
Okay. Okay. So last questions here are mostly going to be your rapid style.
Yeah.
What book are you reading right now?
This sounds horribly geeky, but I'm actually reading the Mueller report.
Okay. Okay.
It's fascinating. I encourage everyone to read it. Seriously, it's great.
Okay. This next one actually is coming from my wife. When she found out I was doing a podcast, she said, you need to ask him, what's his biggest pet peeve?
it's a societal one, to be honest with you. I tell all the new employees that work here at Hydro Ottawa that you effectively have won the lottery twice when you come to work here. Once in being born a Canadian or coming to Canada and living in Canada, and the second being hired by a company like Hydro Ottawa. I think people bitching and moaning about things, complaining for the sake of complaining, the Twitterverse, the keyboard commandos who like to light into anything and everything. They would never say that stuff to your face, but oh God, they're so willing to do it on a computer when they're in their mother's basement. I find that really discouraging, and I think as a society we need to do something about that. These are people that are, we're becoming more and more divided as a society, and look south of the border as an example. But even up here, I mean, look at the level of participation in public debates and in policy. I mean, if it weren't for the Chateau Laurier stuff 2 weeks ago, I don't think anyone would know what goes on at City Hall. So I think that's discouraging, and a pet peeve of mine. You sit there and you complain, but you're not prepared to do anything about it.
Okay. What's your coolest app that you have on your smartphone?
We went down to. I just bought a new dog.
Okay. What kind of dog?
It's embarrassing to say, but it's a Saint Berdoodle. It's a cross between a Saint Bernard and a poodle, so it's enormous. It's 9 weeks old, and it already weighs 15 pounds. It's going to be 130 pounds when it's full grown.
Okay.
So the true spirit of compromise that defines my marriage, I said, I don't want a dog. My wife said, I want a dog. And the kids said, they want a dog. So lo and behold, we drove to Kentucky to buy this dog. So as part of our trip to Kentucky, the road trip to Kentucky, I downloaded the Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives application, so tells you how close you are to these various restaurants that they were on the show. So I would say that's the coolest, because I actually stopped at 2 of them on the way.
Okay.
And it was well worth the $2.99 that the app cost.
What are you most proud of?
My kids.
Very good. Good. A great answer. Okay, Bryce, this was fantastic. If someone wanted to reach out, how could they connect?
I don't have Twitter because my corporate communications folks would, I'd have been fired a long time ago if I had Twitter. No, just, look, people send me email all the time, so send me emails. If you call me, you're likely not going to get through, but if you send me an email, I guarantee you I get it, and we'll address it and respond. Or just come up and talk to me. I try to get out in the community as much as I possibly can. I attend lots of functions and fundraisers, so anytime I'm happy to take a call, happy to take questions, happy to chat, happy to talk about what we do.
Okay, well, thank you very much for joining us today. This was a blast.
Thank you.
Thanks again.
It's great. It's fun.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Hey, folks, thank you for joining us today. I truly hope you enjoyed this episode of ThinkEnergy. For past episodes, make sure you visit our website, hydroottawa.com/podcast. Lastly, if you found value in this podcast, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes, or maybe even tell a friend or a colleague. Anyway, this podcast is a wrap. Peace, everyone.